In every city, there are stories that slip between the cracks, stories of people who fall so quietly that the world barely hears the sound. This documentary begins with one such man, Daniel Cole, a 34-year-old architect from London whose life once shimmered with promise. But on a cold winter evening in Seoul, long after hope had abandoned him, something unexpected happened. He encountered a humble street vendor, an elderly woman selling tteokbokki under a flickering streetlight. What followed wasn't just a meeting, but the beginning of a transformation neither of them could have predicted. Daniel's story didn't begin in tragedy, it began in triumph. He had been the rising star of his firm, celebrated for his clean lines, daring concepts, and a future that seemed unstoppable. Yet beneath the surface, he carried the quiet weight of perfectionism, exhaustion, and the pressure to always produce something extraordinary. When the economic downturn hit, his firm struggled. Projects stalled, contracts dissolved, and Daniel, who had tied his identity to his achievements, found himself crumbling along with the world he had built so carefully. The collapse came all at once, the job loss, the breakup with his long-term partner, and the death of his mother within a span of months. It was as if life had pulled every foundation from beneath him simultaneously. With nowhere to anchor himself, Daniel left London in a haze, taking the first flight he could find. He didn't choose Seoul for any particular reason. It was simply far enough away from everything he wanted to forget. He arrived with a suitcase, a fading sense of direction, and the hope that anonymity might numb the pain. In Seoul, the city's stunning chaos clashed painfully with Daniel's internal emptiness. While crowds rushed through illuminated streets, he drifted, invisible and silent. Days passed in a blur of long walks, coffee shops, and nights spent staring at the ceiling of his budget hostel. The more the world around him moved, the more convinced he became that he had stopped existing. It wasn't that he wanted to disappear, he simply felt that he already had. And that feeling, in many ways, was harder than any physical loss he had suffered. On the 17th day of his wandering, Daniel turned down a dim alley in Jongno. Neon reflected off rain-soaked pavement. The city's usual noise faded into a gentle hum. There, nestled between two shuttered shops, stood a small food cart, glowing with the warmth of its gas lamp. Behind it, an elderly woman stirred a pot of simmering sauce. She was neither remarkable nor imposing, but something about her presence, steady, grounded, quietly alive, drew him in without explanation. Her name was Mrs. Han, a 72-year-old widow who had run the same food cart for almost 4 decades. Locals knew her as Halmiani, the Korean word for grandmother, not because they were related, but because she treated everyone with a kind of tenderness missing from many modern lives. When Daniel approached, she didn't greet him with suspicion. She simply smiled, as if she had been expecting him all along. Her cart smelled of spice, broth, and warmth, a stark contrast to the cold loneliness Daniel carried inside. He ordered tteokbokki with the few one he had in his pocket. As he took the first bite, a sensation surprised him, not just taste, but comfort, grounding, something he hadn't felt in months. Mrs. Han quietly studied him. She didn't ask why a foreigner was wandering the streets alone at night. She didn't pry into his sadness. She simply offered more food, insisting on extra fish cakes, because you look like you need strength. Daniel, startled by the gentleness, felt emotion rising unexpectedly behind his eyes. That night, he stayed near the cart longer than necessary, watching as customers came and went. Mrs. Han greeted each one with the same warmth: construction workers, students, exhausted office employees. She moved slowly, carefully, as if each bowl she served carried a piece of her own story. Daniel realized something profound. She wasn't just selling food. She was offering momentary refuge in a world that often forgot to care. And though they barely exchanged 20 words, Daniel returned to his hostel that night feeling lighter than he had since London. The next evening, Daniel found himself drifting back to the alley. This time, Mrs. Han greeted him with a playful scold for being late, as though she had been waiting for him. They talked briefly. Her English was broken, and his Korean was non-existent, yet their communication flowed easily. There was something universal about human sincerity, something deeper than language. Her laughter, bright and genuine, felt like sunlight breaking through a fog he thought would never lift. Days turned into a quiet ritual. Daniel visited her cart every evening, sometimes helping carry ingredients or clean bowls. Mrs. Han never asked for payment when he didn't have enough. Instead, she taught him small Korean phrases, laughed at his mispronunciations, and occasionally shared stories from her youth, losing her husband early, raising 2 children alone, surviving on grit and stubborn hope. Her life had been shaped by hardship, yet she carried herself with unmistakable peace. Daniel felt humbled. She had been dealt far heavier losses, yet somehow she radiated strength. As their bond grew, Mrs. Han began noticing things about Daniel he never said aloud. She observed how his eyes dimmed when he talked about home, how his hands trembled slightly on difficult nights, how he often avoided looking at his reflection in the metal counter. One evening, after the last customer left and the alley fell silent, she placed a bowl of warm broth in front of him and said simply, "Pain heavy. You carry too much." It was a simple sentence, imperfect in grammar, but it cracked something open inside him. For the first time in months, Daniel spoke about everything: losing his job, the breakup, the guilt of not visiting his mother enough before she died. He confessed how he had run from London not out of strength but fear. Mrs. Han listened without interruption, her eyes soft but unwavering. When he finished, she reached out and gently tapped his chest. "Here," she said. "Still alive, still beating. This means story not finished." It was the closest thing to hope anyone had offered him in nearly a year. After that night, Daniel began accompanying Mrs. Han earlier in the day. He helped carry heavy supplies, set up the cart, and learned how to prepare the sauces she guarded like family secrets. The work was simple, repetitive, grounding, exactly what he needed. There was something healing in routine, in feeling useful again. For the first time in months, mornings had purpose, nights had meaning, and the loneliness that once clung to him like a shadow slowly began to loosen its grip. Locals noticed the foreigner beside the cart and welcomed him without hesitation. Students teased him about his clumsy Korean. Shopkeepers nodded warmly when he passed. Elderly patrons patted his arm, praising his attempts at helping Halmiani. The community didn't ask for details of his past. They accepted him as he was, a man trying, imperfectly, to find himself again. In their warmth, Daniel discovered something profound. Healing didn't always require answers. Sometimes it required belonging. One chilly evening, a sudden windstorm swept through the alley. Car covers flapped violently, and rain threatened to ruin the simmering pots. Daniel rushed to shield the flames, while Mrs. Han secured the supplies with remarkable speed for her age. When the storm passed, she laughed breathlessly and said, "Life like this. Wind comes. You hold what you can. You let go what you must." Her words lingered long after they closed for the night. Daniel knew she wasn't talking about the cart. She was talking about him. Little by little, Daniel's mind began to clear. He started sketching again, at first on napkins, then in a small notebook he bought from a convenience store. The designs were different from his old work. Less rigid, more human, inspired by street markets, warm lights, imperfect awnings. Mrs. Han teased him gently when she caught him drawing customers in comedic proportions, but she always kept the sketches he gave her, storing them carefully in a tin box beneath the cart. One day, she handed him a small gift, an old, worn wooden spoon. "This from my husband," she explained. "He cooked with it when we young. When he die, I keep. Now I give you. You start new life. Use it." Daniel stared at the spoon in disbelief. It was more than an object. It was her trust, her belief in him, her way of saying he mattered. He didn't know how to deserve it, but he accepted it with trembling hands. Despite the progress, not every day was easy. Some mornings Daniel woke with crushing waves of grief. Some nights he found himself reliving the loneliness of London. But each time, Mrs. Han gently nudged him forward. "Small steps," she'd say. Rivers slow but still move. He realized she wasn't trying to erase his pain. She was teaching him how to carry it without drowning. Healing, he discovered, wasn't a single moment. It was 1,000 tiny ones stitched together by patience. As spring approached, the alley grew livelier. Cherry blossoms painted the city in soft pink hues, and Seoul seemed to breathe differently, lighter, hopeful. Daniel found himself feeling the same way. With renewed energy, he applied for small part-time design gigs. To his surprise, several local cafes and shops were interested in his minimalist sketches. One even commissioned him to redesign their interior. It wasn't his old career, but it was a start. And after losing everything, a start felt like a miracle. When he shared the good news with Mrs. Han, she clapped her hands excitedly, almost spilling a pot of boiling broth. "See," she exclaimed. "I tell you, story not finished." Her pride in him was unmistakable. She bragged to customers about his talent, pointing to him proudly as our designer. Daniel laughed each time, but secretly, her words filled him with a warmth he hadn't felt since childhood. One night, as they cleaned the cart together, Daniel asked why she had been so kind to him from the beginning. Mrs. Han paused, then said, "Long time ago, after my husband died, I lose everything too. I sit where you sit, cry same tears, but someone help me. Old woman like me. She say, you live by giving life. So I do same for you." Daniel realized then that kindness was a legacy passed down through people who had survived storms. As weeks passed, Daniel's project gained recognition. A local reporter asked to feature him in a story about foreign artists in Seoul. Hesitantly, he agreed, not to promote himself, but to honor the journey he had taken. During the interview, when asked who had inspired his new artistic direction, Daniel simply pointed to Mrs. Han's card and said, "Everything I've built recently began here." The journalist, touched by their unlikely friendship, requested to photograph them together. The article spread quickly online. Locals flocked to the alley to meet the foreign designer who works with Halmini. Some came for the food, others for the story. Mrs. Han handled the sudden attention with amused disbelief. "I become celebrity now," she joked, waving dramatically. Daniel laughed, but deep down he worried. More customers meant longer hours. He noticed her hands trembling slightly, her steps slowing. H had always been there, but now it revealed itself more clearly. One afternoon, as they prepared for evening sales, Mrs. Han suddenly winced and clutched her chest. Daniel rushed to her side, guiding her to a nearby bench. She insisted it was nothing. "Just old bones complaining," she said, but Daniel wasn't convinced. After gentle persuasion, he took her to a clinic. The doctor confirmed what he had feared: exhaustion, high blood pressure, and the need for immediate rest. For the first time, Daniel saw fear in her eyes. Mrs. Han reluctantly agreed to close the cart for a few days. The alley grew quieter without her presence. Daniel visited her home daily, a small apartment filled with plants and photographs of her late husband and children. She insisted he eat before leaving each evening, and despite her illness, she never lost her warmth. "Don't worry," she would say. "Old trees sway but still stand." Yet Daniel sensed the weight she carried. She had spent her life caring for others. Now, she needed someone to care for her. During her recovery, Daniel used his spare time to sketch something special. He designed a new street cart, lightweight, custom-built, easier for an elderly woman to operate, with compartments that reduced heavy lifting. He poured his heart into the design, determined to give back even a fraction of what she had given him. When he finally presented the sketches to her, she covered her mouth, stunned. "You make this for me?" she asked softly. Daniel nodded, struggling to hold back tears. Mrs. Han's eyes glistened. "My husband would like you," she whispered. The moment felt like a circle closing, grief meeting gratitude, endings merging with beginnings. With the help of a local carpenter and funds from Daniel's growing design jobs, they began building the cart. Neighbors donated materials. Students volunteered to paint the exterior. The entire community rallied behind Mrs. Han, proving that kindness, when given freely, never returns alone. When the new cart was finally unveiled, it glowed under the alley lights like something out of a dream. Sleek, functional, and beautiful, it carried traces of both their lives, Daniel's architectural precision and Mrs. Han's warmth. The moment she ran her hand along its polished edge, tears streamed down her cheeks. "Beautiful," she said. "Too beautiful for old woman like me." But Daniel shook his head firmly. "This is exactly for someone like you," he replied. The reopening of the cart drew an even larger crowd. People clapped, cheered, and lined up for bowls of steaming tteokbokki. Mrs. Han worked slower but joyfully, supported by Daniel at every step. The reporter who had featured them earlier returned to document the event. This time, he focused on the power of community, how one woman's kindness had rippled into something far greater. Daniel stood by the cart, feeling a sense of pride and belonging he never thought he'd experience again. News of the heartwarming story reached a small cultural foundation that supported local artisans. Impressed by Daniel's work and his contribution to the community, they contacted him with an offer to design a series of public installations inspired by traditional Korean markets. The proposal was small but meaningful, a chance to blend his architectural talent with the emotional depth he had gained. When he told Mrs. Han the news, she clasped his hand tightly and whispered, "Your mother proud? I'm proud too." As Daniel's life slowly rebuilt itself, he often reflected on the strange twist of fate that had led him to that alley. He wondered what would have happened if he had turned left instead of right that night, if he had never encountered the warm glow of Mrs. Han's food cart. But fate, he realized, had a way of placing people exactly where they needed to be, even when they didn't know it themselves. What he found in Seoul wasn't just survival. It was rediscovery. One evening, after closing, they sat together on low stools, sipping warm barley tea. Mrs. Han stared thoughtfully at the steam rising from her cup. "Life hard," she said, "but also sweet. Like my sauce." Daniel laughed, recognizing her metaphorical style. She continued, "You know why sauce good? Because many things mix. Spicy, sweet, salty. Life same. Pain mixed with joy. Loss mixed with new start. If only sweet, not special." Her words stayed with him long after he walked home. The deeper their friendship grew, the more Daniel realized that Mrs. Han had become something irreplaceable in his life. A mentor, a second grandmother, and perhaps the first person who truly saw him beneath every layer of grief. She didn't ask him to be strong. She didn't demand he move on. She simply walked beside him, reminding him that brokenness wasn't the end of a story. It was the beginning of rebuilding. As summer approached, Seoul buzzed with festivals and open markets. One event invited small vendors from across the city, and Mrs. Han was selected to showcase her cart. Excited but nervous, she asked Daniel to accompany her. They arrived to a lively scene, music, lanterns, and crowds flowing like rivers through the stalls. Daniel watched proudly as dozens gathered around her cart, drawn not only to the food but to her gentle spirit. Even strangers could sense the history in her smile. Toward evening, a young boy approached the cart, carrying only a few coins. Mrs. Han recognized the hungry look in his eyes and handed him a generous portion without a second thought. When Daniel gently teased her about giving away food again, she shrugged and said, "I give because once someone gave to me." Watching her, Daniel realized that kindness wasn't just something she did. It was who she was, woven into every gesture, every word, every bowl she served. Later that night, as they packed up, Mrs. Han suddenly grew quiet. She touched the side of the cart and whispered, almost to herself, "I think my life full now." Daniel turned to her, uncertain what she meant. She smiled softly. "I see world change. I raise children. I survive. And now I help you live again. Maybe that my last big job." The comment unsettled him, but before he could respond, she changed the subject, asking about his next design project. Weeks passed peacefully, but Daniel couldn't shake the memory of her words. Then one morning, he received a call from her daughter. Mrs. Han had collapsed at home. He rushed to the hospital, heart pounding, memories of his mother flashing painfully through his mind. When he arrived, doctors informed him she had suffered a stroke. She was alive but unconscious. The sight of her frail body, once so vibrant behind the cart, broke something inside him. Daniel stayed by her side for hours, holding her hand and whispering stories. He told her about the first time he tasted her tteokbokki, about the nights she made him laugh, about how she had pulled him back from the edge of despair. Nurses recognized him from the article and treated him with gentle respect. He didn't know if she could hear him, but he kept talking, refusing to let silence swallow the woman who had given him so much. After 3 days, Mrs. Han finally opened her eyes. Weak but smiling, she whispered, "You cry too much." Daniel laughed through tears, overwhelmed with relief. She was stable, but doctors warned that her recovery would be slow. She wouldn't be able to run the cart alone anymore. The news devastated her. 4 decades, the cart had been her world, her livelihood, her connection to the community, her way of staying alive after her husband's death. Seeing her despair, Daniel made a decision. He would take over the cart, not as a business venture, but as a promise. He gently proposed the idea, unsure how she'd react. For a long moment, she stared at him silently. Then tears slid down her cheeks. "You continue my life," she whispered. He nodded. "Yes, just like you helped me continue mine." She placed her hand over his heart, the same way she had months earlier. "Good boy," she murmured. With the community's support, Daniel began training intensively. Mrs. Han supervised from her hospital bed, instructing him on everything: how long to simmer the sauce, how to slice the rice cakes, how to greet customers with sincerity. She insisted that he memorize not just the recipe, but the spirit behind it. "Food tastes different when heart wrong," she warned. Daniel took every lesson seriously, determined to honor her legacy. By autumn, Daniel was running the cart full-time. It wasn't easy. The work was physically demanding and often exhausting. But each day, he felt Mrs. Han's presence guiding him. She visited occasionally, her movements slow but her smile proud. Locals supported him wholeheartedly, offering help when needed. Tourists recognized him from the article and lined up to try the foreigner's tteokbokki. And though Daniel missed his old life at times, he knew he was exactly where he needed to be. The more he worked, the more he understood why the cart meant so much to her. It wasn't just food. It was connection. It was healing. It was a place where strangers felt seen, where tired souls found warmth. Daniel made it his mission to continue the tradition. He gave free bowls to students struggling with exams, to old men who reminded him of his father, to lonely travelers who wandered into the alley as lost as he once was. On the 1-year anniversary of meeting Mrs. Han, Daniel organized a small celebration. Lanterns hung from wires overhead, music filled the alley, and familiar faces gathered to honor the woman who had changed so many lives. When Mrs. Han arrived, supported by her daughter, the crowd erupted in applause. She gazed at the new cart, at Daniel beside it, and at the community that had become her extended family. Tears fell freely from her eyes. Taking the microphone, Daniel spoke from the heart. "When I came to Seoul, I had nothing left. I was lost, angry, and broken. But one woman, a street vendor, taught me that life isn't about what you lose. It's about what you give. Mrs. Han didn't just feed me. She saved me. So tonight, we honor her legacy, a legacy of kindness, resilience, and love." The crowd cheered, many wiping away their own tears. After the speeches, Daniel guided Mrs. Han to a special plaque he had installed on the cart. It read, "In honor of Mrs. Han, who fed Seoul with more than food. She fed it with hope." She touched the inscription with trembling fingers, overwhelmed. "I no deserve this," she whispered. Daniel shook his head firmly. "You deserve more than words can ever give." She smiled, the lines on her face deepening with gratitude. As the celebration continued, Daniel looked around the bustling alley, the lights, the laughter, the familiar warmth. He realized he no longer felt like an outsider. Seoul wasn't just a place he had escaped to. It had become home. And Mrs. Han wasn't just the woman who helped him heal. She had become family. The pain of his past hadn't vanished, but it no longer consumed him. It had transformed into something else, purpose. In the months that followed, Daniel continued designing, cooking, and building new memories. He sent photos of the cart to friends in London, reconnecting slowly with the pieces of his old life. Some invited him back, offering job opportunities. But Daniel wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. He still had more to learn, more to give, more to build here. He knew that one day he might return to architecture more fully, but when he did, it would be as a different man. As winter returned, Daniel stood in the alley one night, watching snowflakes settle softly on the cart's roof. Life had come full circle. The cold that once mirrored his despair now felt peaceful. Behind him, Mrs. Han appeared, wrapped in a thick scarf, smiling gently. "Snow pretty," she said. "Hide world's dirty things." Daniel nodded. "But it also reminds us everything can be new again." She looked up at him proudly. "Yes, and you knew again, too." In the end, this is not just a story about loss. It is a story about unlikely encounters, human kindness, and the extraordinary power of ordinary people. Daniel arrived in Seoul broken, searching for a reason to keep going. What he found was a street vendor, a woman with tired hands, wise eyes, and a heart that refused to stop giving. In her simple acts of care, he rediscovered meaning, identity, and hope. And as he continues her legacy, one steaming bowl at a time, he proves that sometimes the people who have the least to give are the ones who give the most. Thanks for watching.